My daughter-in-law used my late mother's dress as a rag. So I took her wedding gown and, well, let me tell you everything from the beginning. Because this story did not end the way anybody expected. Not even me. My name is Loretta. I am 67 years old. And I have lived long enough to know that people show you who they really are when they think nobody. Important is watching. I learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it on a Tuesday morning in my own home, in the room where I keep the things that matter most to me in this entire world. And the person who taught me that lesson was my daughter-in-law, Savannah. Now, before I get into all of that, let me tell you about my mother's dress. Because if you do not understand what that dress meant to me, you will not understand anything else I am about to say. My mother's name was Ruth. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and within 5 minutes every single person felt like they had known her their whole life. She had this big, warm laugh that filled up every corner of whatever space she was in. She raised 4 children, mostly on her own after my daddy passed, when I was just 9 years old. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She never once complained. She just kept moving forward because that was what she did. The dress I am talking about is a pale blue cotton dress with tiny white flowers, embroidered along the collar and the cuffs. My mother made it herself. She sewed every single stitch by hand because we did not have a sewing machine back then. She wore that dress on the day she got the news that she had saved enough money to send me to college. She was standing in the kitchen crying happy tears, still wearing that pale blue dress with flower on the front from the biscuits she had been making. And I took a photograph of her that day that I still have, sitting on my nightstand right this very moment. When my mother passed 6 years ago, that dress was one of the few things I asked to keep. I brought it home and folded it carefully in tissue paper and put it in a cedar chest in the spare bedroom, the room I always called my memory room, where I keep the things that connect me to the people I have loved and lost. I would open the chest sometimes and just touch it. Just run my fingers across those tiny embroidered flowers and feel close to her again. It still smelled a little like her. Or maybe that was just my mind making it so. But either way, it brought me comfort nothing else could match. And then Savannah happened. Savannah married my son Harrison 3 years ago. Harrison is my youngest child and my only son, and I love that boy with everything I have. When he brought Savannah home to meet me, I tried so hard to love her too. I really did. I saw how happy she made him and I thought, Loretta, you open your heart to this girl. You make her feel welcome. You make her feel like family. For a while, things were okay. Not perfect, but okay. Savannah had very specific ideas about how things should be done, and she was not always gentle about sharing those ideas. She had opinions about how I cooked and how I decorated and how I dressed, and she shared those opinions freely, whether anyone asked or not. But I told myself she was young and still figuring out how to be part of a family, and I gave her the benefit of the doubt again and again. Harrison and Savannah moved in with me about a year and a half ago when they were having some financial trouble. I did not hesitate. I said, you come here, both of you, and stay as long as you need because that is what family does. I gave them the biggest bedroom. I reorganized the kitchen so she could have the cabinet space she wanted. I stayed out of their way when they needed privacy, and I was there when they needed help. I thought we were building something together. I was wrong. What I did not know was what Savannah did on a Tuesday morning in October when she thought I would be gone all day. I had a doctor's appointment and then lunch with my friend Gloria and then grocery shopping. I should have been gone from 9 in the morning until at least 3 in the afternoon, but my doctor's appointment got rescheduled at the last minute, and Gloria called to say she was not feeling well, and I decided to skip the shopping and come on home. I pulled into my driveway at 11:15. I walked in through the kitchen door the way I always do. The house was quiet. Harrison was at work. I walked down the hall to the memory room because I had been thinking about my mother on the drive home, and I wanted to open that cedar chest and touch that dress and just feel close. to her for a minute. I opened the door to the memory room. Savannah was in there. She was on her hands and knees on the floor. She was scrubbing the baseboards, and she was using my mother's dress to do it. I want you to understand what I saw in that moment. That pale blue cotton dress with the tiny white embroidered flowers. The dress my mother made with her own two hands. The dress she wore in my favorite photograph. The dress I had kept safe in tissue paper for 6 years. That dress was balled up in Savannah's hand, and she was using it too. Scrub dirt off my baseboards. It was already gray with grime. There was a dark stain across the embroidered flowers at the collar. The fabric was wet and crumpled and being pressed against the floor like it was nothing, like it was a throwaway rag grabbed from a pile of old useless things. I could not speak. I am not a woman who loses her words easily. I have been through hard things in my life. I have buried a husband and a mother and a sister. But in that moment, I could not find a single word. Savannah looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, and she did not look ashamed. That got me almost more than anything else. She looked mildly annoyed that I was home early. She said, "Oh, you're back already." And she kept scrubbing. I finally found my voice. I said, "Savannah, what are you doing with that dress?" She looked down at it like she was noticing it for the first time and said, "This old thing. I found it in the chest. It is just an old dress, Loretta. I needed something to clean with, and I did not want to use a good towel. Just an old dress. My mother's dress. Made by my mother's hands. Kept safe for 6 years. Just an old dress." I walked over and took the dress out of her hand. I did not snatch it. I did not yell. I just took it and held it against my chest and looked at her and said, "This dress belonged to my mother. She made it herself. She is gone, and this is one of the few things I have left of her." Savannah looked at me with an expression I will never forget, somewhere between impatient and bored. And she said, "Well, it was just sitting in a chest. If it was that important, you should have put a label on it or something. If it was that important, you should have put a label on it." I left that room. I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed and held that ruined dress, and I cried. I cried for my mother, and I cried for the dress, and I cried because I had opened my home to this woman, and she had done this. She had done this, and she had not even been sorry. Now here is where most people might expect me to confront her loudly or do something dramatic and immediate. But I am 67 years old, and I have learned that the best responses are not always the fastest ones. Sometimes the best response requires time and thought and patience. I washed the dress as gently as I could. Most of the grime came out, but there was still a faint shadow of a stain across the edge. Embroidered flowers, and one small section near the hem was worn thin from being rubbed hard against the baseboard. The damage was done. It could not be fully undone. I folded it back in fresh tissue paper and put it in the cedar chest and closed the lid. And then I started paying attention. I had been giving Savannah the benefit of the doubt for almost 2 years. I had been telling myself she was young and adjusting. But after that day, I stopped making excuses and I started watching. And what I saw made my stomach hurt. Savannah had no respect for anything that was mine. She would use my things without asking and put them back in the wrong place or not at all. She threw away a handmade quilt that had been on the chair in the living room because she said it was ugly and outdated. She did not even mention it to me. I just noticed one day that it was gone. That quilt had been made by Harrison's grandmother, and when I asked Savannah where it was, she said she had donated it because it did not fit the aesthetic of the room. The aesthetic of the room in my house. I waited, I watched, and I planned. Now Savannah had this wedding gown. Let me tell you about it because it matters. It was a designer gown, ivory silk with hand-sewn beading across the bodice. And she had spent more money on it than I want to say out loud. She had it cleaned and preserved professionally after the wedding, and she kept it in a special garment bag in the closet. She told anyone who would listen that she was going to pass it down to her daughter someday. She brought it up constantly. She treated that gown like it was the most precious thing she owned. She knew what a keepsake looked like. She knew exactly what it meant to cherish something irreplaceable. She knew, and she had still used my mother's dress as a rag. 3 weeks before their anniversary, I called Harrison at work. I told him I needed him to come home for lunch because I had something important to show him. He came home and I sat him down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. I showed him the dress. I showed him the stain on the flowers and the worn patch near the hem. I told him word for word what Savannah had said. I told him about the quilt and the other things I had noticed over the months. And here's what I had that I had not had before: evidence. Because after that day in October, I had quietly started documenting things. Not in a sneaky, cruel way, but in a this is real and it is happening and I need someone to believe me way. I had written down dates and details. I had photographs of things that went missing. I had a clear record of a pattern of disrespect that was impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up my mother's dress and looked at those, stained, embroidered flowers, and something shifted. In his face, something cracked open. Because Harrison had loved my mother too. He had adored his grandmother Ruth. He knew what that dress was. He knew what it meant. He said, "Mama, I am so sorry." I said, "Baby, I know you are. But sorry is not enough this time. I need you to have a real conversation with your wife. Not a gentle hint. A real conversation about respect. About what it means to live in someone else's home. About what it means to be part of a family." He said he would. And this time, I believed him. That evening, when Savannah came home, Harrison asked her to sit down in the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear everything because our house is not that large. Harrison spoke to his wife with a firmness I had never heard from him before. He told her what I had told him. He told her about the dress. He told her about the quilt. He told her about the pattern of disrespect toward his mother's home and his mother's history. Savannah's first response was defensive. She said I was being overly sensitive. She said it was just a dress. She said she was trying to keep the house clean and I should be grateful. And Harrison said something that made my heart nearly burst with pride. He said, "Savannah, you know exactly what a keepsake is. You talk about your wedding gown every other week. You know exactly what it means to have something precious that you want to protect. You made a choice that day and it was not an accident. And now you need to decide what kind of person you want to be." There was a very long silence. Then I heard Savannah start to cry. Not defensive crying. Not the kind people do when they are caught and want to avoid consequences. This was something different. This was something breaking open. This was a person confronting something true about themselves that they had been avoiding for a long time. After a while, Savannah came into the kitchen. She stood in the doorway, and I could see she had been crying hard. She looked smaller than she usually did. She said, "Loretta, can I sit down?" I said yes. She sat across from me and put her hands flat on the table and looked at me and said, "I owe you an apology. Not a small one, a real one. And I am going to try to give you one if you will let me." I said I was listening. She talked for a long time. She told me things I had not known about how she grew up, about how her relationship with her own mother was difficult and distant, about how she had never really been part of a family with history and memory, and shared precious things and keepsakes that meant something. She said she thought being practical meant not being attached to things. She said she had not understood what she was touching when she touched that dress. And that was not an excuse, but it was the honest truth. Then she said something I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "I think I have been resentful. I think I have been resentful because you and Harrison have this deep history and these memories and these meaningful things, and I grew up without any of that. And instead of admiring, and I picked at it because it made me feel like I did not belong. And that was wrong. That was so wrong." I sat with that for a while. I am 67 years old. I have made my own mistakes. I have been resentful of things I did not have. I know what that feels like. I know how it can make you behave in ways you are not proud of. I said, "Savannah, I am not going to pretend that what you did not hurt me. That dress is damaged, and that is a loss I will carry. But I appreciate you telling me the truth. That took courage. And I am willing to move forward if you are willing to do things differently." She said she was. Then she asked, "Harrison told me how you handled this. He said you did not damage anything of mine or embarrass me. He said you handled it with dignity. Why? Because I did not deserve that from you. I thought about that. Then I said, because dignity is what my mother taught me, and I am not going to dishonor her memory by losing mine." Savannah covered her mouth with her hand and her eyes filled up again, and she nodded. "That was 3 months ago. Things are different now." Savannah asks before she touches things that are not hers. She started asking me questions about my mother and my history. Last week, she asked if she could see my photographs, and we sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours while I told her stories about Ruth. And Savannah listened like she was thirsty for every word. 2 weeks ago, Savannah asked me if I knew anyone who did textile restoration. She found a woman about 40 miles from us who specializes in restoring sentimental fabrics. Savannah made the appointment, drove me there, and paid out of her own money without me asking. When I teared up leaving the dress there, she held my hand and said, "It is going to be okay, Loretta. We are going to take care of it. We." She said we. I thought about that word the whole drive home. My mother used to say the truest test of a person is not how they behave when things are easy, but how they behave after they make a mistake. She said forgiveness is a choice you make for yourself, because carrying hatred is heavy and life is too short for heavy things. Part of me will always flinch when I think about what Savannah did. Some things leave a mark even after you move forward. But I think about that kitchen table conversation and a woman brave enough to say, "I was wrong and I want to be better." And I think that is worth a great deal. Harrison put his arm around me last week and said, "Mama, thank you for how you handled all of this." I said, "Baby, thank your grandmother. It was her dress and her lessons and her voice in my head." The dress comes back from restoration next Friday. Savannah has already cleared a special space in the memory room closet and bought cedar blocks to protect the fabrics. She put up a small shelf for the framed photograph of my mother in the pale blue dress on the day she found out I was going to college. I am going to put that dress back in the cedar chest, wrap it in fresh tissue paper, and close the lid gently the way I always do. And I am going to stand there and thank my mother for teaching me to be the kind of woman who does not throw away a person just because they made a terrible mistake. Because here is what I know after 67 years. People are not their worst moments. Most of them, if you give them the truth with dignity. Most people are capable of better. Savannah is not perfect. I am not perfect. But this family is real and it is ours, and we are building it with honesty now. And that is more than I had 4 months ago. My mother would approve. She would sit at this kitchen table with her coffee and nod slowly and say, "Loretta, you did right. You did right by that girl and by yourself and by me." And that is all I ever needed to hear. Now tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments right down below. And if you love your grandma, if you have someone like my mother, Ruth, in your life or in your memory who made you who you are today, give this video a like, subscribe if you are new here, and please share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somebody out there needs this right now. Somebody is carrying something very heavy, and they need to know that grace is always stronger than revenge, every single time. God bless every single one of you all. I will see you in the next one. Take care.